he said his pronouns, but I'm not judging alone. I have two other judges with me. I'd like them to please introduce themselves in the order of the draw.
Hi everyone, CJ here. Congratulations for making it this far, and yep, best of luck.
Hello everyone, I'm Kashpia. Congratulations on making this far. Best of luck for the next.
Okay. So okay, no problem. So this room is not going to be recorded anyways. Thanks everyone. So I'll be timing you all, but please time yourselves and time others as well, so you know when to ask POIs and when not to. At 7:15, I'll mute myself and politely let you know that your time is up. I think that's all. Um, Good job for making it this far, and let's have a fun debate. I like to invite the Prime Minister to defend the motion. Okay.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, global warming is a threat to everybody in this world. It's not only a threat to the current generation, it's also a threat to our kids and the generations that come after us. Many countries are at risk of going underwater. Venice, Maldives, the polar ice caps are melting, and as these ice caps melt, the ocean becomes more acidic, it becomes hard to sustain life. It's a general argument that the global warming affects the entire world, and that's how we'll frame the debate. I want to talk about two pieces of framing in the opening government first. First, I think the motion gives us some fiat to assume that the score system will pass and that the score system will be accurate. Secondly, I want to talk about the accessibility of the score system, which is that on the op, some arguments might run along the lines of, solar panels are expensive. It's expensive for people to clean up their act. I'm going to debunk this, but I just want to say and note on the comparative that if people cannot afford solar panels, a large majority of these people cannot afford things like cars either. They don't have mansions with 10 air cons. They don't have companies, which run a lot of electricity and harm the environment a lot. So on the balance, it kind of nets out. I want to talk about two arguments in this speech. One, I'll talk about how we change the incentive structure of individuals. Secondly, I'll talk to you about the preferable outcomes and how our world looks like under OG. One, let's start with the incentive structures of individuals. Note that in the status quo, the first point we want to say is that people don't see the impact of the actions. That's to say, they'll say, oh, but it's just one straw in my drink, or it's just one plastic bag when I buy my groceries. They don't see the individual impact, and as such, lots of people don't opt for environmentally sustainable policies. Why do we get under outside? At the point in which you tie this to a personal score, you make it personal for them, i.e. you will not get this job if you don't do this. We think we get greater buy-in when people are scared of their future, right? People want to get far in life and they want to be employed, companies want to have people purchasing their products. So it is likely that people are going to buy into these sorts of things. So this looks like more environmental sustainable policies that people take on the ground. Things like packing your food instead of ordering from polystyrene food containers, bringing your own food container to hawker centers so they give you the food in your container instead of using plastic, which, we all know does not biodegrade well. It takes a long time to do so. B, but not just on a personal level, we think on a corporation level, once we display a score and publicly shame them, less consumers are likely to buy your products. This also has an impact on share or stock prices. If we look at ESG, which I think is the closest equivalent to the ECS policy that we want to pass, a lower score means less people will not buy your goods because you are not environmentally ethical. But the second and more important problem is that solar power, wind energy turbines are extremely expensive. Insofar as corporations have no incentive, no thank you, to invest in these sorts of technologies, they will still use fossil fuels because it is easy to continue fracking. It is easy to continue using electricity. At the point in which you give them a score and there's a first mover advantage, i.e. the first person who hops on this trend is gonna reap the benefits of people who don't. We think there'll be a rush of people to invest in solar panels and wind energy and all sorts of alternative energy solutions. Why is this important? We want to say on opening government is a one-time cost. To set up the solar panel is a one-time cost. To set up the wind turbines is a one-time cost. Sure, it is expensive, but in the point of view of corporations, electricity is a lot more expensive. It's a recurring expense. The main problem we say is people don't want to invest in this huge capital cost when they have no incentives to do so. Thirdly, let's look at it on a national level. This is like we're happy to support things like less trade deals with countries which are not environmental sustainable. We're happy to support sanctions, even going to the extent of boycotts. This means countries like China, which by the way is the country which emits the most pollution in the world is going to get less trade. Why is this true? I mean, obviously, like, they have 1.4 billion people, but on net, their carbon footprint is really high. But also, China is really reliant on coal energy. If you look at the debate we did before this, like, the entire reason they pushed into renewable energy is because China produces the most coal, like toxic gas emissions and greenhouse gases in the world. This is important because China is heavily contingent on people wanting their cheap labor. At the point in which people say, oh, I'm not gonna sure if I want my product to be made in China, or consumers like reject the product because it is made in China and no, China is not environmentally sustainable, they think, hey, I'm doing my part, why isn't X country doing their part? We're very happy to support incentives on a structural level, at the national level, on a corporation level, and individual level as well. I'll take a PI if anyone has one. No? Okay. Let's move to my second argument. What are the preferred outcomes and what our world looks like? Three things to say here. One, on an individual level, we think individuals are more likely to make environmentally good decisions, right? Like, let's be honest, guys, it actually isn't really hard to be good for the environment. What you gotta do? Reduce, reuse, recycle. These are things which literally don't cost you anything. It doesn't cost you anything to turn off the AC in the daytime. It doesn't cost you to drink, not from a straw, but just from the cup itself. It doesn't cost you anything to buy one-time paper bag in comparison to plastic bags every time. Like, you can just do less takeaway food containers. If you're richer, you can install things like catalytic converters, solar panels, wind turbines. We think on net, it is very easy, and there are a lot of accessible steps, even for people who don't have, like, a lot of money to begin with. Second, we think also looks like people choosing things like sustainable clothing. I'm looking at you, Shine, by the way. Like, a lot of people buy from Shine. We think, even though it is cheap, we'd rather buy people buy things which are ethically made. Like, Shine not only has a lot of pollution, but also exploits a lot of child workers. This is a known fact. I'll take that PI, yeah.
You explicitly stated that if you're a little richer, you could have more resources to invest in this technology, right? But we're saying that people from lower middle class individuals will then be relatively compared to these richer individuals, and that affects how they are evaluated as a person.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there are two things. First thing, I said my framing already. Like, if you are poor, you're also unlikely to be able to afford a car. Maybe you don't have an aircon, so it kind of nets out. That's one. But secondly, it's also, I just gave you like 10 things you can do that are like free. Like, you can just not use a plastic bag. That's free, by the way. You know, you need to do that. Let's talk about the last impact we want to talk about, which is how a better environment is good. I mean, clean water and a world which is not hot is good for everybody. Like, I mean, we know that. But we think the outcome is very important here, which is more money going to ESG sustainable policies is good. What does this look like? When more people are compelled to buy solar panels, and we're fine with that, utilitarianism, we're okay forcing people to buy, like we agree on some level, it's maybe some sort of coercion, they'll buy these types of alternative energy sources. The main problem is that it's expensive, right? The problem is usually one, a lack of investment. We think when these companies have more money, this leads to more finance in R&D, alternative energy sources. This looks like competition in the market because now people are incentivized when they know there's a demand. More companies are coming in to compete. What does this mean? This looks necessarily like A, lower prices, B, competition to make better solar panels, C, a less one-time cost. So things like, you know, Apple, for example, people couldn't afford iPhones, so they're stretched out into installments. We think on a net, when you have more people using solar panels and solar companies having more money, it's better able for them to push prices down. We also think there will be more education for the public on how to increase your score if that's so important. What if we put in the opening, Gav? Very proud to propose, we think make the environment better for all on the individual, national, and corporation level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your fine speech. I'd like to invite Elo. But please, Kashia, um, one of your devices on mute.
Hi, may I check if I'm audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Could you move to the side a bit?
Your mic is muted.
I'm so sorry. Give me a second. it might be true that a low-income individual could afford something like a Suzuki or something that is like way cheaper than a Tesla, right? And that obviously means that a rich individual is going to be able to cut down on massive amounts of carbon emissions compared to these low-income individuals. And that's exactly the vulnerable stakeholder that we're protecting on our side. But firstly, let me characterize what a world with ECS will look like. There's a quantitative figure that you are beholden to, and at the back of your mind, it's going to make you feel excessively guilty whenever you waste something, right? But recognize that humans are incredibly faulted. They're inevitably going to have to waste something in one form or another. So we think that yes, it's ultimately going to cultivate like better habits, right? But we think that people are going to feel excessively guilty for their trivial actions. Every time they cannot physically finish their food and has to pour that small amount of food away, they're going to be so paranoid that this small action contributes to the marginal increase of their ECS going up, and that it's going to have detrimental like ripple effects on their future, right? You're going to make them ponder about every single action that they do, even though it might not be helping climate change as a whole, right? I have three constructive arguments for the House today. Firstly, on how this breaches justice and equity, especially for lower income people. Secondly, on how this imposes on innovation and stifles societal progress. And third, on how humans are incredibly faulted and you can't expect this from them. But firstly, some points of refutation for OG today. First, they came up to tell us that they're about like this incentive structure of individuals, right? But let me just say, is it not true that countries have already been implementing like policies like stopping people from buying plastic straws, increasing taxes on like plastic bags and everything? We think that eliminating the option of plastic bags and everything is still going to help to eliminate this harm. It's just that you're not basing their personal worth and how much they are like how competent they are for a job or something to the amount of waste that they actually produce, right? We think that this is like symmetric on both sides because governments have already been engaging and like finding more ways to provide solutions to this problem, right? But secondly, on your substantive on how this like displays a score, so it publicly shames them, you're assuming that consumers are basing their purchases off whether or not companies are like environmentally friendly, right? But you just said that they don't care about the environment. So what makes you think that like shaming these people is going to make them feel bad in the first place, right? You didn't explain why societal pressure is going to affect them inadvertently, and that's a point that we're going to be flipping onto our side in my substantive. But secondly, you said that in response to your POI, like poor people like can have won't have a car, and like also being sustainable costs you nothing and provided us with like a myriad of reasons why that's the case, right? But like yeah, is it not true that poor people have to turn on the light a little less or be pressured into using less sustainable options that are cheaper? Like as someone who is poor, you have so much on your plate, and now you have to sacrifice your mental state to constantly ponder about such issues, like whether or not you should turn on the fan for just that little bit of more time, right? That's just one aspect. And most of the time, it does cost more money to be sustainable. You ask for smaller portions, you pay the same money. So why would a poor person want to engage in that option in the first place, right? Lastly, about the point on how this like brings competition in the market, right? But with the increase in demand, the prices will increase according to supply and demand rule. You're saying that there's more demand with more like in this way, and there's no way you can co-op the benefits of lower prices, right? That's why you're inadvertently harming these lower and middle income people, right? But this leads me perfectly to my first substantive on how this affects the most vulnerable stakeholders, right? Because these people, they're the ones who are barely surviving. They don't have the capacity to leverage on this green tech or whatever to reduce consumption, right? Like they can't afford electric cars and they can't afford to integrate this technology into their daily lives. Even if they might just be cutting down on certain wasteful habits, like the examples OG provided us, it's impossible for them to eliminate every factor in their lives, right? Especially when you relatively compare it to a richer individual who has better, who has like a higher ECS because they have the capacity to jack up their ECS because they can afford this technology, right? There's already going to be a negative connotation tied to this lower middle income person's name, and they're evaluated based off of that. So look, you're comparing an average person with a relatively decent life with
On
this
that,
low middle income person who desperately needs a higher paying job, right? That's extremely problematic because these people are the ones who are affected the most. Like in cases of employment, they might need that higher like paying job to break out of the generational poverty cycle. Proposition focuses on the environment, but we see that there's no point in tangible change on that small scale, right? And to that point, it's already negligible because on our side, these middle income people, they're still going to be wasting these things because they don't
that.
have the incentive to actually invest in these things, and they don't have the capacity to contribute to this change, right? But before I move on, I'll take a POI from closing. No, thank you. Okay, next. On my second substantive on how this imposes on innovation, right? Because people, especially scientists, they don't want to be held accountable for these issues, right? Because what's the point if they innovate a great technology after years of experimenting and wasting resources into experimenting, but society doesn't accept them and use their thing because they want to like boycott their company and
OG.
whatever. That's what they've said, right? Note that there are plenty of revolutionary innovations that are not necessarily green, right? That requires prototyping, and side proposition is essentially opposing that. That means that innovation will be stifled tremendously, right? I'll take that point.
Taylor Swift's one private jet emissions in a year is over 1,100 times higher than the average person. Can you tell me why this debate is about poor people and the one fan that they have in their house?
Yeah, but Taylor Swift, she already has a good career, doesn't she? These lower middle income people, they don't have the capacity to even get a job. And with this thing that they are beholden to, then it decreases their chances significantly of getting a good job if companies are going to base off their employment choices on that, right? And moving on to my substantive, people will not be able to take risks anymore when it comes to experimenting, because when these companies don't dare to take risks and waste these resources experimenting and prototyping, that means that these companies don't make as much progress as they wish to, right? Note that side government might say, oh, but we want sustainable tech, so we trade off this form of innovation, right? But listen, we only get to have good measures to stop climate change when the economy is stable and under control. It is only when the economy is under control that it's stable and the government can shift their attention to sustainable related tech, start implementing more policies, as what we've already leveraged on in my setup, right? In order for them to have sustainable tech, you have to have a good economy. And note that side proposition cannot argue that their economy will do just as well, as there's no major shift in innovation. Stuff will always only be centered around green tech, and it will take a long time for the economy to stabilize to the original state again, and by that time climate change has already reached an irreversible state. So what have I proven to you in this speech? I've proven that I flipped all of proposition's arguments onto them and brought it to a point of our side. For all those reasons, proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the leader of the opposition for your fine speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. Give me a moment. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, three things in this speech. First, rebuttals towards OO, an expansion on what Ryan has already given you, and third, how OG effectively mitigates whatever harm is being pushed by OO, right? What does OO tell you? Panel, notice how poor people are not massive polluters anyway. This debate cannot be about poor individuals, as they don't contribute to global warming. If anything, they are the ones suffering at the hands of it. Notice how OO's case essentially boils down to guilting individuals and guilting corporations into caring about environmentalism. What does OG tell you then? We tell you already, we're willing to bite the bullet and push these people who previously were never held accountable, because if it's going to materialize towards the greater good, we don't understand why incentivizing people to care is a net harm, right? The second claim is now less risk happens and less innovation happens. Notice, panel, innovation and corporations taking risks can still happen, but it has to happen in a way that is ethical and sustainable due to the implementation of ESG policies, right? In so far that OO does not prove that ultimately all of these things cannot happen with the existence of ESG, they cannot take this debate. Now, on to the extension on what Ryan tells you. So Ryan already tells you that the implementation of this policy ultimately impacts individuals and corporations on a threefold. The first impact lies in the overall restructurization and perception regarding environmentalism, because we already tell you that nations acknowledge that this is an existing problem. However, there's no actual accountability or no actual strategy that's being put in place to prevent the further degradation of this problem. The moment you the moment you submit these initiatives, you provide the general public a reason to care, a reason to acknowledge that it is a collective responsibility and effort in order to overcome overcome this problem. The second impact then lies in the incentive, because the moment you establish a linear model for people to follow, there now becomes a cognitive change within their minds. No, thank you. Where people are now incentivized to heavily care about the impacts of their actions. This doesn't just lie on an individual level then, but it lies towards corporations as well, because you are now incentivized to produce your products ethically. Nations are now incentivized to implement larger scale ESG policies, because you know that this is something that is being taken seriously and on a wide scale, right? The third impact then lies in the comparative, because although there is the issue of accessibility that side OO wants to push to you, there is the issue of lower income individuals not being able to access these resources, and it ultimately becomes an element of exclusivity, because those who are more privileged have a higher likelihood to make conscious decisions like buying ethically sourced products, like buying sustainably made clothing. How does OG mitigate this then? One, we tell you already, a poor individual's carbon footprint is likely going to be low anyway, so this is ultimately a wash. But even if there is an argument on accessibility, the more competition that is able to materialize due to the implementation of this ESG incentivizes companies to make their products cheaper, to make their products more accessible. So that is how on-site OG were able to practically benefit those who are actively contributing towards environmental degradation, as well as the people who are suffering at the hands of it. What then is the subsidiary impact that is only able to be attained on site OG? The moment people become more sustainably aware, there now exists the practical impact of actual environmental protection for people who are already suffering at the hands of climate change. Notice how OO doesn't sufficiently provide a reason at all why this model is unlikely to be effective, yet we tell you the moment now people now choose to care about environmentalism, the impacts are now widespread. What does this look like then? One, you have companies like Shein go under public scrutiny due to their harmful practices. You have children in Congo no longer have to dig for lithium batteries because people don't need to fuel whatever vape gadget they're using, because they know that it's practically harming these people. And finally, you no longer have children. No, thank you. You no longer have children in Bangladesh being forced to inhale like these factory fumes due to the manufacturing that ultimately isn't benefiting anyone. For all those reasons, then stand with side OG, because we are the only side that actually tells you why the implementation of this ESG is required and why the subsidiary benefits are not able to be overcome. And it is too late at this point for OO to tell you what exactly is the ineffectiveness of the implementation of this policy. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Chief Prime Minister for the fine speech and invite DLO to conclude our part.
Hi, sorry, let me first get my phone.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay. Oh no, it's still here. Hi, I'm audible at this volume, right? Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I start with my main themes for this house today, and before I prove to you why we already win this debate, let me do one point of housekeeping. We like to point out that OG dropped the entire point on their impact on middle class people. They've been strawmanning our entire case and only focusing on one aspect that EZen has provided you. We didn't just talk about low income people, but we also talked about the majority of the people, the middle class people. This is the average people. That's why they are middle class, right? And we think that it's precisely because that they've left it unengaged with, that it means that they concede that on their side, they're effectively harming them. They're leaving them with another thought for them to be haunted by on their side of the house. And it's precisely because of that we win this entire debate. And I'll be proving to you why more so on later. But firstly, moving on to my first theme on lower income people, right? The first question I'd like to ask is, will they be able to get a job? So here's a little preemptive point. Some team might say that like, oh yes, because the 3 R's are cheap, right? Like it doesn't cost anything to be like to reduce, reuse, and recycle. And when it gets pushed forward, more people can access this. But it's not true, because pushing it forward causes you to increase the demand. And the supply and demand, according to the supply and demand rule, as the increase in demand increases, the prices also increase, right? That's a factual reason. That's a structural reason that no side can oppose. So as long as any team on site government government concedes that on their side there will be an increase in demand to green tech, they effectively also concede there's going to be an increase in prices, since they're only focusing on one aspect, which is green tech, right, which is so limited, which then results in poor people being unable and middle class people very largely having a hard time affording technology like this, right? The second question I like to ask is, will these people be happy? Now, side proposition OG has hardly responded to this, but let me prove to you why this is debate winning. These poor people are already haunted by the idea that they are being plunged into them every day. By every second that goes by, they don't have money to feed their family, or like every day they have to think about whether or not they are capable of putting food on the tables. We tell you that they're already haunted by this lingering thought of them not having enough money. You take away the only thing that they have left, the only form of mental stability they have left. Now that not only do they have to worry about getting a job, but because of that, they have to have this additional burden of having to like turn on the fan a little less, or maybe watch out for what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Note that in order for side proposition to prove that their world will actually carry out, to prove that people will be this aware about their steps in their day-to-day life, that means people have to be haunted by the idea that everything they do has to come with a consequence. Yes, we think that it's great for people to think about what they have to do and the consequences that follow, but sometimes it can just get too much. Can you imagine having to turn on the tap, and the second you turn on the tap, some little voice in your head goes, girl, you're not gonna get a job if you turn on the tap. Or the second you turn on the AC to study a little more to get into Harvard, someone goes, girl, if you don't turn off the AC right now, Harvard's gonna say no, because they discredit you for everything that you've done. We think that these thoughts, they haunt you on a day-to-day basis. It's a thought you can't get out of your mind. What if I don't get to Harvard? What if I don't get into this place? What if this place doesn't hire me? I've worked towards this place my whole life, and they don't hire me just because I turn on the tap for a little longer. It just doesn't make sense, right? And it's precisely because that they've left this unengaged with that we already win such a big part of this debate. They're taking away the mental health of these people, and that is precisely what we oppose. But the third question I'd like to ask is, do lower income people matter in the context of this debate? Side government says that no, because major contributors are like the rich people, right, like Taylor Swift, and they are the ones that matter. But guess what? Yes, the rich do matter. So just implement it for them. Why do you have to implement it for the rest of the public? You already conceded in your POI to Ezen that there are harms on low income people, but you try to mitigate it by saying that who cares, because at least we get to help the rich people. Yeah, but you're trading off like 2/3 of the rest of like the majority of the people, right? You're trading off 2/3 of society. They're gonna be harmed when you do that. Because of that, we tell you that side proposition has been so narrow-minded. All they've been telling you is about the climate change benefits, which I'll be shutting down later onwards. And they've never once thought about the other harms that this policy can actually bring when it's implemented, about the fact that in order for these things to even be carried out, people have to have that lingering, haunting thought in the back of their mind that they are doing something so wrong that's going to cause the entire earth to end, right? That's exactly what we oppose, and we think that there's better ways to do this. What's the alternative that we would rather opt for? We would rather have governments just be stricter as a whole and not have this imposed on any of their rights, and rather just have governments push towards the idea to them of how important climate change is, or at the very least set policies for maybe like private jets, for example, so people like Kim Kardashian or like Travis Scott stop using their private jets more, and they don't do this at the expense of 2/3 of the society. That's a side that we'd rather opt for. And note that side gov has really conceded that they've been harming these people in terms of their mental state, which means they really lose a huge part of this debate, because they're doing everything just for the vast minority, which we can also do on our side with stricter policies and regulations for them in their private jets. But the second thing that I like to talk about is they say that poor people have like really low carbon footprints. Firstly, everyone contributes. Secondly, even if that's true, we already told you the mental harms that come with this entire policy being implemented, right? It just doesn't make sense. What did I prove to you then? I proved to you that lower income people and middle class people are something that you should be looking at in the context of this debate. I proved to you that low-income people should not have the sole thing that they have, which is like their daily happiness of just living through life as a whole, taken away from them and stripped away from them, because they literally have nothing else left. Side proposition is effectively getting rid of their only way of getting out of this poverty cycle. You're adding onto their burdens. Not only now do they have to have a good resume, but now they also have to be all sustainable, which is making things so much harder on their side of the world. Next thing I like to talk about is my clash on climate change, right? So I like to ask, which side better stops this? OG comes to tell us a simple idea. They say that they can change to green tech, which helps everyone. We tell you this is worse. Why? Ezen has really told you that climate change is approaching very soon. The end of the world is approaching very soon. It's incredibly unstable. At some point, the world's just gonna end. Maybe 20 or 30 years. What does this then mean? This means that we don't have time to switch over our economy, right? Because when this happens, that means companies are forced to switch over to sustainable tech. But note that that governments can only help with climate change related policies when the economy is doing well, right? They can't achieve that on their side when they make such a drastic change all of a sudden, and companies start changing over for immediately, right? Because they try to say that they have immediate changes. This just doesn't work like that. What does this mean? It means that by the time this economy stabilizes on their side of the house and stabilizes to the original state that it was doing well at, it means it's too late to implement these things. It means that climate change has already reached a point where it's incredibly irreversible and it's about to tip over, and like seawalls can't cover up the rising sea waters anymore. Second thing I'd like to ask, do countries care? They say no, tell you not true. ExxonMobil has switched over to green tech. Singapore has a green plan 2030. China has heavily invested and hinged 60% of their economy on the green technology. It's factually incorrect. Last thing I'd like to talk about is they have no actual mechanism because their model relies on human nature, which isn't predisposed. You can't assume that every person is going to react the same way to this policy to incentivize them. But even if we already proved you why you don't help climate change as a whole, and we better do that because we don't stop the economy. Because of that, we win this entire debate and we outweigh every other team. Thank you.
And I thank Yellow for their fine speech and invite the members of the half.
Hi, can I get like 30 seconds to like get my notes together?
Sure. MG?
Okay, hi, can I confirm that I am visible and audible?
Yes, to both.
Okay, great. So before I begin my speech, she, her pronouns, and POIs in the chat, please. I have the chat open so I can see if anyone put a POI. Okay, so if everyone's ready, then I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, all previous teams in this debate do not recognize the key stakeholder and the monopoly in this debate, government and the state. All of OG's arguments come on the prerequisite of better governmental policies and of the government better utilizing their finite financial resources. Only then would OG's benefits materialize. In the first part of my speech, I'll be highlighting some problems on the top half and doing some reframing in this debate. First, on dealing with OO. So they talk about like their whole case is centered around the premise of like poor or middle class people, and they keep on defending this key stakeholder as the main person in this debate. Okay, so they cannot really be the main stakeholder because they actually aren't that bad, and we agree fully with OG in this sense. Poor or middle class people, they will try to save as much money as possible on things so they can spend it on things like basic necessities, spend it on things like making their family happy, maybe going out to dinner somewhere. So if governments put in incentives, for example, if governments make cutlery for takeout maybe $5 more expensive, then obviously they will try not to get these plastic cutlery for takeout. Obviously they'll try to use their own cutlery that is still reusable. So companies like these really big giants that we actually need to care about still won't care because they're the elitists and the richest people just sitting at the top, and no one is incentivizing them on the opposition's world. So OO is already out of this round. Now second, on to OG. I want to point out some lacks here. Their benefits are only tangible, as I highlighted in my opening, if governments are actually involved in this, and if governments are actually going to distribute their financial resources properly and in an efficient manner. Their entire premise lacks reasoning, and they have given quite a few one-liners without full explanation. They only focus on the key stakeholders of the individual user and the corporations, but they don't take their case to a higher level of actually the government and the state. So and also at this point, we still don't really know how the ECS system works, so I will be doing some reframing on this in my model. So OG is also out of this round. So now onto some reframing. I will first want to do some characterizations here. Like the OG stated, environmental degradation degradation, and harms to the environment are irreversible. This is a very time-sensitive matter, and the OO fails to recognize this. Countries are sinking, and places are becoming more and more inhabitable. If we do not enforce this right now, we might not have even a place to live anymore. The entire world is going to become uninhabitable, and the environment will become more and more unsalvageable. This is time sensitive, and we must solve it as soon as possible. Now onto the model, and I will be refining some of the lacks in that the OG framed here. So first, we will see this app as like more accessible through like the form of maybe like an app, maybe like a mobile app, and they will probably receive weekly reports, and this ECS system is probably run by governments or reasonable organizations that are like reliable and reputable, and they have a standardized test score system, etc. There will probably be higher taxes or even fines for those who have an overly low ECS, which is like bad, of course. Okay, so which have an overly low ECS, and they'll probably like be government incentive to do so. This will be elaborated on in my extension. So experts in the environmental sector can decide on how low the score is to be considered ridiculous or to be considered needed to be like unpunished. Okay, so accessibility is high, and we prove this point that OG failed to do so. So what is the burden in this debate? This debate is just about proving why this system is good for the environment socially and economically. We need to prove why now that governments are also better and reforming for the better and using their money, their finite financial resources for the better. Now onto my extension. My first extension is this is a creative new approach that directly solves the issues of government putting in finite financial funds into the correct place, which a stakeholder that OG failed to recognize, as I have to highlight again. My first extension is, on the financial aspects, how are governments now more cost-effective and more efficient in reallocating and redistributing resources? 6 reasons why this is true. First, on data accuracy. This system utilizes like user data throughout this process. It's not just based on previous assumptions or previous studies done by like some research organization, whatever. It's actual user data that is being inputted into the system. Data is good to create like good policies because rich people all of course consume a lot of resources, for example the land, for example water, because they simply do not care if they turn the AC on for 24 hours. So what if they leave the house with the AC on? Because they can simply pay up to it, and it's probably not detrimental to their wallet. Second, on targeted funds and investments, there is detailed data on the environmental performance of these individuals, all these businesses, and all these communities. Now the governments know where they actually should put their money into, who they should punish for these for this environmental like issue. Now they know that they need to like hike up the taxes for the rich to disincentivize them from using things like private jets. So this is like very important because obviously middle or lower income families, they won't be able to afford a private jet, and they won't be able to contribute to like CO2 emissions as much as these rich elitist people. Third, there's a better reallocation of resources. We are giving more money, like the government is now incentivized to use that money that they collect from this higher taxes on the elitist people to give to the vulnerable, to give to the struggling people. And so like the poor people argument that OO gave is quite untrue again, as I have to flag out once more, because of the fact that like we are actually the poor people, they are lacking these structures, they are lacking these basic needs. So instead we are redistributing the money for these poorer people. So before I move on, I'll take my POI from opening. If majority of the world's greenhouse gases come from the lowest income countries, why is this the case when you say that poor people are not massive polluters? Okay, so this brings me on to a point that I'll elaborate on later. Like for the low income, for the low income families or low income individuals, it's probably to do with things such as like lack of awareness or lack of education, which this will be addressed later on in one of my reasons. And also you don't understand that like the main polluters are still the companies in like the big companies like Zara, H&M for example. They are still the main people, the elitists that sit up there and don't care because they can pay up the price, literally. Okay, now on to my fourth reason, the easier justification of reallocation. These companies or these people probably has very low ECS scores. Now the government can actually target the elitist groups who simply don't care. Yes, the rich people are now forced to opt for green tech because we can offload the cost for these technologies to the rich people and make it cheaper for the poor people, assuming that their credit system will be good. So if rich people don't carpool, rich people won't care if a plastic straw is $2 more expensive. They simply don't care. Now fifth, on reduced administrative costs is we have a more centralized platform that manages like this environment like monitoring and reporting. There's this streamlined administrative process, and there is this like very clear and
reputable actually organization that helps to enforce these regulations. And six, finally, on education and awareness. People who are not aware, for example, in the POI about like lower income, lower like developing nations, for example, they are now made aware through this incentive and through this policy, and like things like littering. They're now aware that this is the issue. The issue of climate change is now more evident than ever. For all the reasons above, never been prouder to propose.
Thank you very much, member of government, for that fine speech. Can we have the member of opposition?
My pronouns are she, her. I will take POIs verbally. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Is having an environmental credit score system really that great? I will prove to you why it's honestly. I want to point out that everyone is focusing on people, but not the big picture impact of policies to not the big picture impact of policies to companies and environment. That brings me to my first extension. Why does this policy disproportionately harm and target individuals when companies are the biggest killers for the environment? I'm going to start by prefacing the scope of this extension. PO in this debate will focus on the big picture. We don't think that regulating and policing the micro actions that individuals do towards the environment matter in the grand scheme of things. The biggest evils that violate the environment are inevitably the tech giants, huge conglomerates, and the profit incentivized companies that need to be stopped. This policy misdirects issues and punishes people at the expense of enriching companies. First part of this extension. Why are companies much bigger evil compared to individuals with regards to the environment? Three reasons why. First of all, the scale of operation. Companies operate on a much larger scale than individuals, leading to a greater environmental impact. Industrial activities such as manufacturing, mining, and agriculture require extensive use of natural resources and generate significant waste and pollution. The manufacturing sector is a major contributor to the environmental pollution. For example, the global steel industry, which produces over 1.8 billion metric tons of steel annually, is responsible for approximately 7 to 9% of direct emissions from the use of fossil fuels globally. Second, about resource consumption. Companies require substantially larger quantities of raw materials, water, and energy to produce goods and services. This high level of consumption can lead to the depletion of natural resources and significant environmental degradation. The global extraction of raw materials has more than tripled since 1970, reaching 92 billion metric tons in 2017. This includes materials like minerals, ores, fossil fuels, and biomass. Say in the textile industry, for instance, where it use up to an estimated 79 billion cubic meters of water annually. If we could take up to 2,700 liters of water to produce a single t-shirt, of course we cannot forget the energy industry as well. Companies are significant consumers of energy, particularly fossil fuels. The industrial sector accounted for about 37% of global energy use in 2018. This consumption leads to high greenhouse gas emissions, contributing to climate change. And thirdly, companies just pollute. Just the top 100 companies in the world alone are responsible for 70% of global carbon emissions. And there are about 300 million companies in the world. All these three reasons show that the reason why global temperature is rising beyond the reason why the environment is slowly becoming our homes that are destroyed is primarily due to companies' actions. If the companies did not exist, all our individual and micro actions like smoking, driving a car, having a refrigerator that emits CFC gas, all are super marginal to the environment, and we definitely would have survived in a much more sustainable world in the absence of companies. The second point of this extension. Why then is the environment credit score a horrible idea? Two illustrations of this. First of all, it shifts policymaking from regulating companies to regulating individuals, and it will probably focus on micromanaging the smaller actions of people. This looks like, for instance, government using smart meters or mobile apps to track individual energy usage and water consumption, issuing fines or penalties for excessive use, while large industrial facilities with intricate processes remain less scrutinized. Second, corporations have significant resources and influence to lobby against stringent regulations that would affect their operations. This lobbying can result in policies that target individuals instead, as they lack the same level of influence. This is exactly why, in many countries, developing economies, the fossil fuel industry successfully lobbied to limit regulations on carbon emissions from their operations, shifting the burden of reducing emissions onto consumers through carbon taxes and incentives for individual carbon reduction. Why can't the government team say the system includes companies? Two reasons. Companies' data of environmental abuse are already very present in this estimates. There's already a wide array of database tracking companies, so this policy won't be any different from this. Second of all, companies engage in greenwashing. Companies like Pepsi, Volkswagen, and a host of others always evade justice and liability by engaging in mechanisms to duplicate their carbon emissions to avoid justice. So even if this policy
Wait.
includes some their sheer lobbying power and money in power, they have to evade have to evade justices makes this policy too sensitive. What is the delta on our side, and why does this extension alone win us the debate? Two impacts to make this clear. Firstly, on our side, we have the incentive to regulate companies because we're not shifting the focus on individuals. This looks like having environmentalists work closely with companies by suggesting green tech models, for instance, or even asking shareholder activism to ask, but even asking shareholder to ask companies to release emission reports like the Combank in Australia. The point is, we always try to meet the middle and ask companies to change rather than making them complacent but shifting the blame to people. Secondly, the proposition does not even reach long-term environmental goals. Even if everything government has, they can't substantially improve the environment because you still don't touch the 70% of carbon emissions that are caused by companies. At the best, in their world, the change is marginal or
On
taken
that,
down to smaller levels, but the environment will still die out. What? Why is this winning? Two reasons why. We win on the metric of certainty. This argument is certain. This is not ambiguous like the OG's claims that this policy may be good for people to change. Because all is right that some people cannot or do not have the capacity to change. We win because our extension explains why even if both the claims of OG and OO are true,
point.
our impact still applies very strongly in both. No thank you. In both their worlds, and we need to hold them in check. We also win on the metric of magnitude of benefits. Even if you buy a bench that some change take place in the environment, and that you buy that some people are minorities and don't have capacity, we have explained a much bigger perspective by saying it doesn't matter if people act irrationally or pollute, if companies are absent. Focusing disproportionately on individuals is the most textbook definition of a problem solution mismatch. Um, I will take any POIs from the opening.
Yeah.
Out
Yeah.
of order.
Okay.
Moving on to my second speech. Sorry, you had a POI?
Protect your time.
Okay, never mind. Moving on to my second extension. Why then is this bad for environmental goals in the long run? Judge, this extension is simple but profound. One preface of this extension. This is not a hypothetical debate. It is not a this house prefers a world debate or a profits flat that this magically takes. It's a this house would policy debate, which means there needs to be a model by now. This suggests in order for the system to take place, governments need to measure the total greenhouse gases caused by an individual's activities, including transport, energy consumption, and dietary choices. Government needs to track the amount and type of waste produced, focus on recycling and composting efforts. All these efforts require money, time, and serious logistics. What is our counterfactual based on this premise, and why is it? We prefer using less money into propping up more officers and authorities to document every single action people do, but use this money into actual environmental reversal costs. This looks like carbon capture or cloud seeding that actually reverses the impacts to the government. It could also look like forging international agreements between companies to maintain collaboration for the environment. Using our limited money to regulate and make people change is a waste of resources for long-term goals. To conclude, we win this debate because we have shown you the bigger picture. We have shown why the government and what the opening government and opposition were arguing about is completely useless. We have shown you why the government is completely wrong. I am more than proud to oppose. Thank you.
I thank the member of the opposition for their fine speech and invite the government with.
First, I want to confirm I'm audible and visible.
Yes to both.
Okay. Share pronouns and strictly verbal POIs. If you raise your hand or type in chat, I will ignore you. My speech will begin on my first word in 3, 2, 1. CJ brings the most crucial perspective in this debate with the largest impacts. Government help, reallocation, and targeted funds. Only through better governmental policies are OG benefits materialized. And O's entire case of poor people and middle class people falls apart because we say government would help them and government changes would have the most impacts in this debate. So before going on into issues of today's debate, right, I'll be doing this team by team and refuting each team. The first team, OG. There are contributions of them under this issue that the ECS systems now make people now more aware of the behavior and more incentivized to change it. What's the purpose of this core system, right? It's to see the carbon consumption of people. CG wants to change people's OG wants to change people's behavior here. And this definitely has some validity, right? They talk about corporations, talk about people, and how they would be more cost effective. This is true as well, right? But what is the crucial part they missed in their speech here, Judge? They missed the crucial aspect of government. That this is a government run system. Governments are allocating the costs here. Sure, some people might make individual changes, but the thing as a whole is better for something for the government to make effective changes, right? They miss a crucial aspect as a whole
impact is much less than ours. They prove people have incentive, but don't prove why exactly they can enforce it or will. They gave all one-liners, and they did not provide any incentives to companies or how they would change. When governments literally make more significant change and are one of the biggest stakeholders here, and they ignore them, and any new policies and allocations government make outweigh the benefits of OG, even though their arguments have some validity. Because only through better governmental policies, only then would OG's benefits materialize. The weighing here is that their impacts are not even as relevant as ours and much more minor. So OG's case, while it is valid, it misses crucial layers of analysis and is not that relevant and it has much less weight compared to CG's. So now to review OO. OO says societal pressure will not affect these people, right? Yeah, this is speculative and one-liner. They mention sacrificing your mental health, yet at the same time claim it has a minuscule impact. So this is completely contradicting. I'd like to ask them, how does turning on your fan for 5 less seconds turn your mental health down, right? They claim government has no elaboration, yet their case is perhaps even more messy. They claim people can't afford to make big changes, right? And this is why they ignore our case, because government claims people can make small changes to improve their score, and CG's extension is that the government as a whole can allocate costs better, which means everyone's scores will also improve because of government policies. But even if poor people, sure, they might have a low environmental credit score, because rich people are now forced to opt for green tech, we can offload the cost of these technologies to rich people to make it cheaper for poor people. When asked about the Taylor Swift POI, right, they don't implicitly respond to it at all. So we can offload the cost of these technologies to rich people to make it cheaper for poor people. For instance, they know that they would need to hike up taxes for the rich to incentivize them using private jets, right? And there'd be better reallocation of resources. They could give more money to the vulnerable and struggling people on our side of the house. The government could do this. It's still like just because you're poor or middle class, suddenly the government will not care about you anymore, right? Because obviously the government will know that your options are limited and will help them. We say we have easier justification of reallocation, and they do not bother to attempt to respond to this. Further, OO second speaker tells you about middle class people, poor people again and again. And average people, etc. They say they're pushing it forward, increases demand. It's not like just because you're poor or average middle class, as I mentioned, the government will forget about you, right? They talk about how people having the additional burden of watching what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, which firstly contradicts their whole first speaker's argument of gov didn't prove people would have incentive, because now they say the incentive and burden is too high, right? So how extreme is their case, right? How is turning on your sink gonna make you not get a job or make Harvard reject you, right? The case is completely not possible. Their case is perhaps the most messy throughout this entire debate. So, sure, even if we bite the bullet and say some people would have a small additional burden, even the small changes they make, free changes can increase their score. So, you don't use plastic bags. So what? This minor burden is not even relevant to the urgency of the environment. They have no haunting thought here, really, because most environmental benefits also benefit the poor. For instance, taking Uber is more expensive than carpooling or using public transport. Spending money on a tote bag is cheaper than buying plastic bags every day. Carpooling is cheaper than money on gas, and it's better for the environment too. Mutual benefits exist here. OO's harm relies strictly on the premise that poor people are the primary contributors to environmental degradation. So far, they have still not proven why it's likely, and it's only speculative on their side of the case. OO still hasn't engaged in a scenario that ECs would affect everyone, and we can mitigate potential harms to poor people when we redistribute better. Even regarding all the in their case, if their messy case is somehow supposedly perfect, our CG extension still takes it down, because any reallocations governments make, any changes government make in CG's world would improve everyone, even the poor and middle classes scores better as well, right? So furthermore, they talk about poor people when they were asked at a POI about developing countries, but we say it's a lack of awareness. A test would improve, and it's because they're manufacturing for first world countries, so it disproves the premise that just because you're poor, you will definitely contribute to pollution. Yeah, POI before I move on into my seal member part.
You didn't
Yeah.
engage with our point on how the stable economy is the prerequisite to better climate change policies. And in order for your benefits to manifest, these people actually have to be aware of it, right? And this means that they have to have this thought lingering in their mind and affecting all of their decisions.
So basically, we already tell you that the government trumps this entire benefit of your case. The economy, the government, the go- the economy, the public, and like the companies. The government trumps all of these examples because we tell you that government changes would reallocate all these funds and would improve these benefits still as a whole, right? Now moving on to CO. Other than having so many specific numerical statistics that they probably did internet searches, CO's extension seems to only get one minor point across. When Gov said companies, the really big giants, still won't care because no one is incentivizing them, CO literally contradicts OO here because they say the biggest polluters are tech giants when OO said the biggest polluters are the middle class and the poor people. And CO do not even try and attempt CG's to refute CG's extension, so our point still stands. Now, moving on into the second half, in which I'll be doing CG extensions and why they're crucial, we bring a crucial perspective, targeted funding, and investments from the government. Because the government now has this detailed data on their citizens' environmental performances of individuals, businesses, and communities, now they know what they're put their money into, to. For instance, they know that they would need to hike up taxes for the rich to disincentivize them, right? Obviously, government would know poor people's options are limited and help them. They would give money to these poor, struggling people to refuel oil. They probably have a very low EC and they're helping them. So the government as a whole could also make significant, impactful changes, flipping O's entire case on poor individuals who can't make any money because we tell you the government would help them. The government's impacts would trump all of their arguments because it would help them, and also any impacts we make would be much more important on our side, right? Our system utilizes data because data is good to create policies. And our extension takes O's case down about the speculative only poor people case. CG also takes O's case down because even regarding all their holes in the case, even any reallocation governments would make, any changes governments make in CG's world would improve everyone, even the poor, even the middle class. Because even if their example of developing countries generating the most carbon emissions is true, we still solve this issue. We also talked about increased education and awareness because now governments are incentivized to reallocate their finite financial resources to things like public education. And furthermore, only our side is able to prove that all of the OG's impacts only materialize on our side, right? They don't provide any incentives to help companies and they would change. So, Judge, because of the fact that through better governmental policies, only them and OG's benefits materialize, our impacts outweigh theirs tenfold. OO only focuses on one minority demographic, and CO's points are contradicting and do not even attempt to engage with ours. Therefore,
And
CG clearly takes this debate because of how we've proved the government's benefit everything much more tenfold. Thank you.
thank you very much, Governor Wood, for that fine speech. We'll have the opposition vote to conclude the debate.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you.